The crystal flute of champagne felt like an icicle in Julian Croft's hand, a perfect, cold extension of the man he was supposed to be. He stood on the dais, the ballroom a Monet painting of blurred pastels and glittering diamonds below him. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. He was the keynote speaker, the guest of honor at the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a man celebrated for his Midas touch in the cutthroat world of corporate acquisitions. His speech, written by a team of publicists, had been a triumph. It was full of words like synergy, philanthropy, and community, words that felt like foreign objects in his mouth. He delivered them with practiced sincerity, his deep baritone resonating with a confidence he didn't feel. For 5 years, since the accident that had wiped his memory clean, this had been his life, a performance. He was a ghost, inhabiting a stranger's exquisitely tailored suit. The applause had washed over him, another wave in a sea of polite, meaningless noise. Now he was watching the proceedings, a faint, sculpted smile fixed on his face, his mind a quiet white room. Then the master of ceremonies, a man with a booming voice and impossibly white teeth, announced the final performance of the evening. And now, to remind us all why we're here, a special song from one of the wonderful children of the Northwood Children's Home, Little Lily. A single spotlight cut through the opulent gloom, finding a tiny figure in a simple white dress walking hesitantly to the center of the stage. She couldn't have been more than 6. A small, fragile thing in a room full of predators and peacocks. The crowd offered a ripple of indulgent applause. The little girl clutched a microphone that seemed comically large in her small hands and took a shaky breath. And then she began to sing. Her voice was small, pure, and slightly off-key, but it sliced through the ballroom's clatter like a silver knife. It wasn't a show tune or a pop song. It was a lullaby, simple and hauntingly familiar. The moonbeam paints a silver line to guide you where the river winds. The sleepy stars will watch you grow and whisper secrets that they know. The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the polished marble floor. The sound swallowed by the little girl's song. The glittering ballroom, the sea of faces, the entire gilded reality, he knew, dissolved into a blinding pinprick of white light. For a single, heart-stopping second, he wasn't Julian Croft, the CEO. He was someone else. He saw a woman's face, not beautiful in the polished way he was accustomed to, but radiant, with laugh lines crinkling at the corners of her eyes and a smudge of flour on her cheek. He smelled sawdust and summer rain. He felt the phantom weight of a small, trusting hand nestled in his own, and a wave of love so fierce and absolute it buckled his knees. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He was back in the ballroom, gasping for air, the starched collar of his shirt suddenly choking him. The little girl finished her song, the last note hanging in the stunned silence before the room erupted in applause. But Julian couldn't hear it. He could only hear the echo of the melody drilling into a locked room in his mind, a room he never knew existed, and rattling the door. His security detail, a pair of imposing men named Harris and Grant, were at his side instantly, their faces masks of professional concern. "Sir, are you all right?" Harris asked, his voice a low rumble. Julian couldn't answer. He was staring at the little girl, who was now being led off the stage, her small form swallowed by the velvet curtains. He felt an irrational panic, a desperate urge to call out to her. He had to know where she learned that song. It felt like the only real thing he had experienced in 5 years. "Find her," Julian managed to say, his voice raspy. "The girl. I need to speak to her." Grant nodded curtly. "Right away, sir." Julian pushed past them, ignoring the concerned looks and murmurs from the nearby tables. He strode through the crowd, his movements stiff and automatic, a sense of unreality washing over him. His fiancée, a statuesque blonde named Isabel Davenport, intercepted him near the exit. Her beauty was as flawless and cold as a diamond. "Julian, darling, what was that?" she asked, her perfectly plucked eyebrows arched in disapproval. "You dropped your glass. People are staring." Her hand on his arm was cool, her touch possessive. He barely felt it. "I'm not feeling well," he said, the lie tasting like ash. "I need some air." Her expression softened into a mask of practiced sympathy. Isabel was the daughter of Marcus Davenport, the man who had found Julian 5 years ago, a John Doe with a severe head trauma and a case of dissociative amnesia. Marcus had taken him in, given him a name, a history, and a position in his company. Isabel had been part of the package, the perfect corporate wife for the perfect corporate heir. "Of course, my love," she cooed. "Let's get you home. You've been working too hard." She tried to steer him toward the waiting limousine, but he resisted. "No, I have to do something first. You go ahead. I'll take another car." The flicker of annoyance in her eyes was quickly suppressed. "Don't be silly. I'll wait." But Julian was already moving, his gaze scanning the throng of people for his security team. He spotted Grant near the backstage entrance, shaking his head. Julian's heart sank. He pushed his way over. "What is it?" he demanded. "She's gone, sir," Grant reported. "The orphanage staff whisked her and the other children out a side exit right after the performance. Said it was past their bedtime." The frustration was a physical pain in Julian's chest. It was like waking from a dream and desperately trying to hold on to its fading wisps. "Which orphanage?" "Northwood Children's Home," Grant said. "It's one of the Foundation's primary beneficiaries." Julian nodded, his mind racing. "Get me everything you can on them. And on the girl. Her name is Lily. I want to know everything." The drive back to his penthouse was silent and tense. Isabel attempted to make conversation, chattering about the gala, the people they'd seen, the deals that had been whispered over cocktails. Julian heard none of it. He stared out at the glittering cityscape, a sprawling circuit board of light and shadow, but saw only the ghost of a smiling woman and the earnest face of a little girl singing a forgotten song. His penthouse was a monument to minimalist wealth. It was all glass and chrome and shades of gray, a sterile space that offered breathtaking views of a city he didn't feel a part of. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, nothing to suggest a life lived, only a life curated. The history they'd given him was that of a prodigy from a distant, deceased family, educated abroad, a brilliant but solitary man who had suffered a tragic car accident. It was neat, clean, and left no room for questions. Until now. That night, he didn't sleep. He paced the cold marble floors, the lullaby playing on a loop in his head. The moonbeam paints a silver line. It was more than a song. It was a key. He could feel it, turning a lock deep inside him. He went to his desk and switched on his computer. Grant had already sent the preliminary file. Northwood Children's Home. A respectable, if underfunded, institution on the frayed edge of the city. He scanned the list of residents. There she was, Lily, age 6, admitted 5 years ago as an infant. Parents, deceased, a fire. The word leaped off the page. Fire. He felt a sudden phantom heat on his skin, smelled the acrid bite of smoke. He recoiled from the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was just a word, a coincidence. But the white room of his mind was no longer quiet. It was filled with whispers and shadows. The next morning, he canceled all his meetings. He told his astonished personal assistant it was a personal matter. Isabel was furious. A personal matter? Julian, we have the final closing with the Hashimoto Corp. You can't just disappear. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a beautiful, calculating stranger. Watch me, he said, his voice colder than he intended. He drove himself, taking one of the less conspicuous cars from his collection, a sleek black sedan that still looked ridiculously out of place as he pulled up to the Northwood Children's Home. The building was old brick, institutional and grim, with a small, patchy lawn where a few children were playing on a rusty swing set. It was a world away from the gleaming towers of his daily life. The air here smelled of damp earth and boiled cabbage. He was met at the door by the headmistress, a severe-looking woman in her late 50s, named Mrs. Gable. She had a face like a clenched fist, and eyes that seemed to see right through his expensive suit to the confusion churning beneath. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "This is an unexpected honor. We were so grateful for your generous donation last night." Her tone suggested she was anything but grateful. "I'm here to see one of the children," Julian said, getting straight to the point. "Lily." Mrs. Gable's expression tightened. "Lily is in class. The children are not to be disturbed during their lessons." "I'll wait," Julian said, his jaw set. "It's important." There was a long, tense silence as they stood in the drab, linoleum-floored hallway, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. Mrs. Gable seemed to be weighing her options. He was a powerful man, her primary benefactor. But there was something else in her eyes, something akin to fear. "Very well," she said finally, her lips a thin line. "You can wait in my office, but I can't allow you to see her alone." Her office was a small, cluttered room filled with gray filing cabinets and stacks of paperwork. She left him there, closing the door with a decisive click. Julian paced the small space, feeling like a caged animal. He could hear the distant shouts of children in the yard, the drone of a teacher's voice from a nearby classroom. An hour crawled by, then another. He was about to go in search of Mrs. Gable when the door opened. She stood there, and behind her, peeking out shyly from behind her skirt, was Lily. She was even smaller than he remembered, with big, curious brown eyes and a cascade of dark, tangled curls. She was clutching a worn, one-eyed teddy bear. "Lily, this is Mr. Croft," Mrs. Gable said. "He wanted to say hello." Lily didn't speak. She just stared at him, her gaze wide and unnervingly direct. "Hello, Lily," Julian said, his voice softer than he thought possible. He crouched down to her level, ignoring the strain on his expensive trousers. "I heard you sing last night. You were wonderful." A faint blush colored her cheeks. She buried her face in Mrs. Gable's skirt for a moment before peeking out again. "Thank you," she whispered. "That song," Julian said, his heart beating a little faster. "It's a very beautiful song. Where did you learn it?" Lily looked up at Mrs. Gable, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The headmistress gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Lily looked back at Julian. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've just always known it." Did your mother sing it to you?" Julian pressed gently. Lily's face fell. A profound sadness settled in her young eyes. "My mommy's a star," she said, in a small, rehearsed voice that broke his heart. "She watches over me from the sky." "I see," Julian said, the words catching in his throat. He felt Mrs. Gable's hard stare on him. "Mr. Croft, I think that's enough," she said, her voice sharp. "You're upsetting her." She placed a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "Lily, why don't you go back to the playroom? I'll be there in a minute." Lily looked at Julian one last time, a flicker of something he couldn't name in her eyes. Recognition? Before she turned and scurried down the hall, her teddy bear dragging on the floor behind her. As soon as she was gone, Mrs. Gable's demeanor turned to ice. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Mr. Croft, but I want you to leave. Now, stay away from that child." Her hostility was jarring. "I'm not playing a game," Julian said, standing up. "That song, it means something to me. I think it might have something to do with my past, before my accident." He decided a sliver of the truth was his best strategy. Mrs. Gable's face was unreadable. "That child has been through enough trauma. Her parents died in a fire when she was a baby. She has nothing. Don't try to fill the voids in your life with her." "I have no intention of harming her," Julian insisted. "I just want to understand." "There is nothing to understand," she snapped. "You are a wealthy man, and she is an orphan. Our worlds do not connect. Please leave before I have to call security." He knew he couldn't force the issue. He was on her territory. But as he walked out of the bleak building and back to his gleaming car, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mrs. Gable was lying. Her fear, her hostility, her quick dismissal of his questions, she was hiding something. And he was more determined than ever to find out what it was. The next few days were a blur of clandestine activity. Julian leveraged the full extent of his considerable resources, hiring the best private investigators money could buy, instructing them to be discreet. He wanted everything on Mrs. Gable, on Northwood's history, and on the fire that had supposedly orphaned Lily. He felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a purpose that had been missing from his life. He was no longer just going through the motions. He was on a hunt. The initial reports were frustratingly sparse. Mrs. Gable was a career administrator in the child care system, scrupulous, respected, with a spotless record. The orphanage was perpetually on the brink of financial collapse, kept afloat by donations like his. The fire was a cold case. A small house in a working-class neighborhood on the other side of the state had burned to the ground 5 years ago. It was ruled accidental, faulty wiring. The remains of a woman, Sarah Walker, were found inside. Her husband, Leo Walker, a self-employed carpenter, was missing and presumed dead, likely having perished in the blaze, his body consumed by the intense heat. Their 1-year-old daughter, Lily, had been rescued by a neighbor, and with no known relatives, had become a ward of the state. It all seemed straightforward, a tragic but closed chapter. But it didn't feel closed to Julian. Leo Walker. The name meant nothing to him. Carpenter. The word sparked another phantom sensation, the rough texture of wood grain under his fingertips, the clean, sharp scent of pine. He looked at his own hands. They were smooth, manicured, the hands of a man who signed checks and shook hands, not a man who built things. Yet the feeling lingered. The investigators had also managed to get a copy of Lily's birth certificate. Father, Leo Walker. Mother, Sarah Walker. No photograph of either. It was a dead end. Meanwhile, his life in the stratosphere continued. He went to board meetings, his mind a million miles away. He moved numbers around on spreadsheets, feeling a profound disconnect from the vast sums of money they represented. Isabel was growing increasingly suspicious and resentful of his distraction. "What is wrong with you, Julian?" she demanded one evening, as he stared blankly at a plate of meticulously arranged food he hadn't touched. "You're like a zombie. Is it about the Hashimoto deal? My father can smooth things over if you're having second thoughts." "It's not the deal," he said, pushing his plate away. "Then what is it? Is it another woman?" The accusation hung in the air of their cavernous dining room. He almost laughed. The idea was absurd. He had no interest in other women. He had no real interest in Isabel. Their relationship was a merger, not a romance. "No, Isabel, it's not another woman." "Then talk to me," she insisted, her voice rising. "This silence, this secrecy. It's not like you. The Julian I know is focused, decisive. The Julian you know is a fiction," he thought. "The Julian you and your father created." The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and clear, and it startled him. He had always been grateful to the Davenports. They had saved him, given him a life. But now, for the first time, he felt a prickle of resentment. Had they given him a life, or had they given him a cage? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Frustrated with the official channels, Julian had also hired a musicologist, a quirky, brilliant professor named Dr. Alistair Finch, to trace the origins of the lullaby. For days, Finch had found nothing. The melody wasn't in any known database of folk songs or classical compositions. Then, one rainy afternoon, Dr. Finch called, his voice trembling with excitement. "Mr. Croft, I've found it. It's not a recorded song. It's an oral tradition, a folk lullaby. And it's incredibly localized." "Localized where?" Julian asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "A small, rural region in the western part of the state. A cluster of towns in the foothills of the mountains. Specifically, it seems to originate from a little town called Havenwood. It's a very old song, passed down through generations. You wouldn't find it anywhere else." Havenwood. The name resonated deep in his bones. It felt like a memory trying to surface. He pulled up the file on the fire. The house that had burned down, the home of Leo and Sarah Walker, was on the outskirts of a town called Pine Creek. He quickly opened a map. Pine Creek was less than 10 miles from Havenwood. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a breadcrumb trail. He knew what he had to do. He told Isabel he was going on a business trip, a site inspection for a potential acquisition. It was a plausible lie. He packed a simple bag, leaving behind the designer suits and silk ties. He dressed in jeans and a plain gray sweater he'd had his assistant buy. Looking in the mirror, he saw a stranger. Or perhaps, for the first time, he was seeing a hint of the man he used to be. The drive to Havenwood took 5 hours. He left the sprawling, anonymous city behind, the landscape slowly transforming from concrete and steel to rolling hills and dense forests. The further he drove, the more a strange sense of peace settled over him. The air grew cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth. Havenwood was a town that time seemed to have forgotten. It had a single main street, lined with old-fashioned storefronts with faded paint. There was a town square with a gazebo and a war memorial. It was quiet, peaceful and utterly alien to him. Yet, as he parked the car and walked down the street, he felt an unnerving sense of déjà vu. The way the light filtered through the leaves of the oak trees, the sound of a distant church bell, the smell of baked bread wafting from a small bakery, it all felt vaguely, achingly familiar. He didn't know where to start. He felt foolish, a man chasing a ghost based on a song. He walked into a small diner with a blinking neon sign that said Peggy's Place. It was warm and inviting inside, filled with the clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of conversation. A bell above the door chimed as he entered, and all eyes turned to him. He was clearly an outsider. He took a seat at the counter. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a cloud of white hair bustled over. "What can I get for you, hon?" she asked, her voice warm. "Coffee, please," he said. She poured him a cup of dark, steaming coffee. "You're not from around here," she stated, more of an observation than a question. "No," Julian admitted. "Just passing through." He hesitated, then decided to take a chance. He hummed the first few bars of the lullaby. "This might sound strange," he said, "but I'm trying to find the origin of a song. It goes something like this." Peggy's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, that's Sarah's song," she said, her eyes twinkling with memory. "Well, that's what we all called it anyway." Julian's heart hammered in his chest. "Sarah? Sarah Walker, sweetest girl you'd ever meet. Grew up right here in Havenwood." That was her family's lullaby, passed down from her grandmother. She used to sing it all the time. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he was both terrified and desperate to see. "Sarah Walker," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you know her well?" "Know her? Honey, I watched her grow up," Peggy said, leaning on the counter. "She was one of my waitresses for years before she met Leo. A real love story, those two. He was a quiet fella, a carpenter over in Pine Creek. Came in here one day for a slice of pie and was absolutely smitten. They were inseparable after that, so happy together, especially after they had little Lily." Peggy's smile faded, and a shadow of sadness crossed her face. "It was a terrible tragedy. What happened? The fire. Losing both of them like that. We all felt it. It was like a light went out in the world." She looked at him more closely, her brow furrowed. "It's funny," she said slowly. "There's something about your eyes. You remind me a little of him, of Leo." The coffee cup trembled in Julian's hand. He placed it carefully back on the saucer before he could drop it. He was on the right path. Leo Walker, Sarah Walker, Lily. He was standing on the edge of his own history. Where did they live?" he asked, his throat tight. "They had a little place just outside Pine Creek," Peggy said. "Leo had his workshop there, a beautiful spot right by the woods." He thanked her, leaving a $50 bill on the counter for a $2 coffee. He had to go there. He had to see it. The drive to Pine Creek was short, but it felt like the longest journey of his life. He followed Peggy's directions, turning off the main road onto a gravel path that wound through a thick stand of pine trees. The air grew still and silent, their only sound the crunch of tires on gravel. And then he saw it, or what was left of it. At the end of the path was a clearing. In the center stood the charred, skeletal remains of a small house and a larger outbuilding that must have been the workshop. The ruins were overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, nature slowly reclaiming the site of the tragedy. He got out of the car, his legs unsteady. The air was heavy with the ghosts of memory. He walked slowly toward the ruins, a feeling of profound, bottomless grief washing over him. This was it. This was where his life had ended, and where it had, perhaps, begun again. He stepped over the blackened foundation of the house. He could almost see it as it must have been, a small, cozy home filled with love and laughter. He could almost hear the sound of a woman humming a lullaby. He moved toward the larger ruin, the workshop. The roof was gone, but some of the walls were still standing. Inside, piles of charred timber and rusted tools lay scattered among the debris. He saw a workbench, miraculously intact, though blackened by soot. He ran his hand over its surface, and a jolt went through him. A lightning strike of memory so vivid it brought him to his knees. He saw his own hands, younger, rougher, calloused, planing a piece of wood. He smelled the sawdust, felt the satisfying heft of a hammer, the focus and precision of his work. He saw Sarah leaning in the doorway, her smile bright, bringing him a glass of lemonade. "You work too hard, Leo," she says, her voice a melody. He saw a little girl, a toddler with a mess of dark curls, playing on the floor with wooden blocks he had carved for her. He looked down at his smooth, soft hands, the hands of Julian Croft, and a wave of nausea and revulsion swept through him. Who was this man, this impostor who had been living his life? He stumbled out of the workshop, gasping for air, the memories coming in fractured, overwhelming flashes. A picnic by the creek, Sarah's head in his lap, dancing in the kitchen to a scratchy radio, holding his infant daughter for the first time, terrified and overwhelmed by love. The night of the fire, the smell of smoke, thick and acrid, the heat, a living, breathing monster, Sarah's scream, the image of a falling beam, the searing pain, darkness. He collapsed onto the grass, the carefully constructed edifice of Julian Croft crumbling into dust. He wasn't Julian. He was Leo. He was Leo Walker. He had a wife. He had a daughter. And he had lost them. A sob tore from his throat, a raw, ragged sound of a man who had been dead for 5 years and had just woken up in his own coffin. He lay there for a long time, the forgotten grief of a forgotten man washing over him as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the ruins of the life he had lost. The descent of twilight over the ruins was a slow, creeping thing, mirroring the darkness that was receding from the corners of his mind. He lay on the damp earth, the manicured CEO a distant memory, replaced by a raw, hollowed-out grief that was terrifyingly real. He was Leo. The name settled into his bones, not as a piece of information, but as a fundamental truth. He was a husband who had lost his wife, a father who had lost his child, or had he, Lily, the little girl at the gala, the child in his fragmented memories, his daughter. She wasn't a star in the sky. She was alive. She was in an orphanage, less than 100 miles away, being cared for by a woman who had lied to his face. A cold, hard anger began to burn through the fog of his sorrow. Why? Why was his daughter in an orphanage, while he lived a life of empty luxury? Why had no one told him? The questions swirled, and at the center of them were the Davenports. Marcus Davenport, his savior, his mentor. Isabel, his fiancée. They had found him, a nameless man with a shattered memory. They must have looked into his past. They must have known. They had to have known. They hadn't saved him. They had stolen him. They had seen a blank slate, a vessel to be filled with their own ambitions, and they had erased Leo Walker to create Julian Croft. They had knowingly and deliberately kept him from his own daughter. The thought was so monstrous, so profoundly cruel that it took his breath away. He pushed himself up, his movements stiff. He needed to get back. He needed answers, and he needed his daughter. The drive back to the city was a fugue of rage and determination. He drove recklessly, the powerful engine of the sedan a poor substitute for the storm raging inside him. He didn't go to his penthouse. He went straight to the Davenport mansion, a sprawling, ostentatious palace in the city's most exclusive enclave. He stormed past the bewildered butler, his muddy shoes leaving tracks on the pristine white marble floor. He found Marcus and Isabel in the drawing room, sipping brandy. They looked up, startled by his disheveled appearance. "Julian, what on earth happened to you? Your suit is ruined," Isabel exclaimed, her voice laced with horrified disapproval. "My name," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "is Leo Walker." The name dropped into the opulent silence of the room like a stone. Isabel looked confused, but he saw the flicker of panic in Marcus Davenport's eyes, the tightening of his hand on his brandy snifter. "Julian, you're not making any sense," Marcus said, his voice smooth and controlled, the voice he used to dismantle his corporate rivals. "You've had a shock. You're exhausted." "Don't!" Leo commanded, the word cracking like a whip. "Don't you dare patronize me. I went to a place called Pine Creek today. I saw the ruins of my home, my workshop." He took a step forward, his eyes boring into the older man. "I remember my wife, Sarah. I remember the fire. And I remember my daughter, Lily. My daughter, who you have let languish in an orphanage for 5 years." Isabel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "An orphanage? Julian, what are you talking about?" "He knows, Isabel," Marcus said quietly, his facade finally cracking. He looked old and tired in that moment. He stood up, setting his glass down with a heavy sigh. "I knew this day might come." "You knew?" Leo's voice was incredulous. "You knew who I was this entire time? You knew I had a daughter?" "When we found you by the side of the road, you were half dead," Marcus said, his tone defensive. "No identification, severe head trauma. The doctor said you might never recover your memory. We ran your fingerprints, your DNA. We found out who you were. We learned about the fire, about your wife's death, about the child who had survived." "And you did nothing," Leo whispered. "The betrayal a fresh wound. You just left her there." "It was a complicated situation," Marcus insisted, his voice rising. "You were a carpenter from a backwater town. You had nothing. I saw potential in you, a brilliance that was being wasted. I saw a man who could become my heir, who could run my empire. What could you have offered that child? A broken man with no memory. I gave you a new life, a better life." "A better life?" Leo laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You gave me a prison. You dressed me in expensive clothes and taught me to speak your language of greed and power. But you hollowed me out. You took my soul. My daughter has been growing up without a father, thinking she's alone in the world, while I've been playing the part of your puppet." He turned to Isabel, who was staring at him, her face pale with shock. "And you? Did you know? Was our entire relationship, our engagement, just part of the charade?" She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know at first," she stammered. "My father told me you had amnesia from an accident. It was only later, a year or so ago, that he told me the truth. He said it was for the best. He said your old life was filled with tragedy, and it was kinder to let it stay buried." "Kinder?" Leo spat the word. "You call this kindness? Stealing a man's child from him?" The fight went out of him then, replaced by a vast, weary emptiness. He had his answer. It was uglier than he could have imagined. "It's over," he said, his voice flat. "The engagement, my position at the company, all of it. I don't want your money or your name. I just want my daughter." He turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the stunned silence of their gilded cage. He didn't look back. There was nothing left for him there. His first call was to his lawyer, a sharp, tenacious man named David Chen. He woke him up, but he didn't care. He explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences. David was silent for a long moment, processing the sheer audacity of the Davenports' deception. "This is unprecedented, Julian. I mean, Leo," he finally said. "Legally, it's a minefield. But morally, it's a nightmare. We'll fight this. We'll get her back." The next morning, they went to Northwood. Not as a benefactor, but as a father, flanked by his lawyer. Mrs. Gable was waiting for them in her office. She looked pale and nervous. The practiced severity was gone, replaced by a brittle fear. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Croft," she began, but Leo cut her off. "My name is Leo Walker, and I've come for my daughter, Lily." He placed a copy of Lily's birth certificate on the desk, alongside a DNA test result that David had arranged with a rush order overnight, comparing his sample to one retrieved from a hairbrush the investigators had covertly obtained from Lily's room. It was an undeniable match. Father and daughter. Mrs. Gable stared at the papers, her face ashen. I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," David said, his voice dangerously smooth. "My client has recovered his memory. And we have records, financial records, showing substantial, anonymous donations made to this home for the past 5 years. Donations that, curiously, trace back to a holding company owned by Marcus Davenport. It looks a lot like you were paid to keep quiet, Mrs. Gable, to make sure that if Lily's father ever came looking, he would be turned away." The headmistress crumbled. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her stern composure. "He told me the man was a vegetable," she sobbed. "He said he was in a permanent care facility, that he would never recover. He said it was better for Lily to believe her father was gone than to know he was. Like that. The money. We needed it so badly. The boiler was broken. We couldn't afford a new roof. So you took the money and you lied," Leo said, his voice hard, but the anger was tempered by a sliver of pity for this woman, caught in a powerful man's web. "You let my daughter believe she was an orphan." He took a deep breath. He couldn't change the past. He could only fix the future. "I'm not here to ruin you, Mrs. Gable. I'm here for my daughter. I want to see her now." The reunion was not the cinematic moment he had imagined. It was quiet, awkward, and heartbreaking. They brought Lily into the office. She looked from Leo to Mrs. Gable to the strange man in the suit, her small face clouded with confusion. She clutched her one-eyed bear to her chest like a shield. Leo knelt, just as he had done before. "Hi, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't respond, just watched him with those big, solemn eyes. "Do you remember the song you sang at the party?" he asked gently. She nodded. He started to hum it, the simple melody that had unlocked his entire world. Her eyes widened slightly. "My mommy used to sing that song," she whispered. "I know," he said, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. "She sang it to you, and she sang it to me." He had to tell her the truth. but simply. "Lily," he said, his heart aching with the weight of the last 5 years. "I'm not a star in the sky. I'm your daddy. My name is Leo. I was in an accident a long time ago, and I hurt my head very badly. I forgot everything. I forgot you. But hearing you sing that song, it made me remember. I'm so sorry I was gone for so long. I didn't know how to find you." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the ingrained belief that her parents were gone, warring with the strange sense of familiarity she felt with this man. She looked at his face, then took a hesitant step forward. She reached out a tiny hand and touched the tear on his cheek. "You're crying," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Yes," he choked out, "because I thought I had lost you forever. But I found you." She didn't run into his arms. She didn't call him Daddy. It wouldn't be that easy. The wounds were too deep, the lies too old. But she didn't pull away, either. She just stood there, her small hand on his face, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A beginning. It wasn't the end of a nightmare, but the start of a long, slow dawn. And for Leo Walker, it was more than enough. It was everything. The process of formally adopting his own daughter was a surreal journey through a bureaucratic labyrinth. David Chen handled the legal intricacies, presenting the DNA evidence and the story of Leo's amnesia and the Davenport's deception to a stunned but sympathetic family court judge. The story was so extraordinary that it garnered whispers in the hallowed halls of the courthouse, but David, ever the professional, managed to keep it contained, arguing successfully for sealed records to protect Lily's privacy. While the lawyers battled, Leo began the slow, delicate process of building a bridge to his daughter. He couldn't simply take her from Northwood, the only home she'd ever known. It would be another trauma piled upon a lifetime of them. So he visited, every single day. At first, their time together was spent in the sterile observation room at the orphanage, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed child psychologist. Leo brought her small gifts, a sketchbook and colored pencils, a beautifully illustrated book of fairy tales, a small wooden bird he had painstakingly carved in his hotel room, his hands slowly remembering their old skills. He didn't push. He just sat with her, sometimes in comfortable silence, sketching alongside her or reading a story aloud. He learned about the small world she had constructed for herself. He learned that her bear was named Barnaby, and that he was very brave. He learned that she loved the color yellow and was afraid of thunderstorms. He learned that she missed a friend who had been adopted a few months earlier. Each detail was a precious jewel, a piece of the daughter he was getting to know for the second time. The turning point came a week into his visits. He was reading her a story about a lost fawn finding its way back to its mother. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up at him, her brow furrowed in concentration. "If you forgot," she asked, her voice small, "how did you remember the song?" Leo's heart swelled. It was the first question she had asked about their past. "I don't think my head remembered it," he said carefully. "I think my heart did. Some things. You feel them so strongly that you can't ever really forget them, even when your brain gets mixed up. My heart remembered loving you and your mommy. The song was like a key that unlocked the door for my head to remember too." She seemed to accept this explanation. A few days later, she tentatively took his hand as they walked in the orphanage's small garden. The contact was electric, a confirmation of a bond that had been stretched but never broken. He fought the urge to weep, to pull her into his arms. He just held her small hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles, and focused on matching his steps to hers. He was severing all ties to his old life as Julian Croft. He signed papers, relinquishing his shares, his titles, his name. The Davenport empire, he learned through David, was in turmoil. The story, though not public, was spreading through the closed circles of the city's elite. The tale of Marcus Davenport's staggering hubris and cruelty was a far more delicious scandal than any hostile takeover. Marcus and Isabel became social pariahs. Leo felt a grim satisfaction, but his focus was elsewhere. He used a fraction of the money he had amassed as Julian, money he felt he hadn't earned, but could now use for good, to buy a house, not a glass box in the sky, but a real home with a big backyard and an old oak tree perfect for a swing. It was in a quiet, family-friendly suburb, a place with good schools and parks, a world away from both the corporate jungle and the rural ghosts of Pine Creek. He furnished it not with minimalist art and designer furniture, but with comfortable sofas, soft rugs, and warm, inviting colors. He spent a week assembling a princess castle bed for Lily's room, struggling with the instructions, feeling a deep, simple joy in the act of building something for her with his own hands. He also set up a trust fund for Northwood, an endowment large enough to ensure they would never again be so desperate as to be compromised by a man like Marcus Davenport. It was his way of closing that chapter, of ensuring that the place that had sheltered his daughter would be a true sanctuary for other children. The day Lily came home was quiet and ordinary, which felt exactly right. There were no balloons or parties. He picked her up from Northwood, her few belongings packed in a small suitcase. Mrs. Gable, her face etched with a weary remorse, wished them well, her eyes lingering on Lily with genuine affection. As they drove away, Lily looked back at the grim brick building, not with sadness, but with a quiet sense of finality. When they walked into the new house, her eyes went wide. She walked from room to room, touching everything tentatively. When she saw her bedroom, with the castle bed and a shelf full of new books and toys, a slow, wondrous smile spread across her face. It was the first time he had seen her truly smile, and it was like the sun coming out. That night he tucked her into her new bed. She was clutching Barnaby, looking small and vulnerable in the big, unfamiliar room. "Will you sing the song?" she whispered. He sat on the edge of her bed and sang the lullaby, his voice soft and a little rough with emotion. The moonbeam paints a silver line to guide you where the river winds. As he sang, he watched her eyes grow heavy. Just before she drifted off, she opened them again. "Daddy?" she said, the word a sleepy, tentative question. It hit him with the force of a physical blow, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes, Lilybug," he whispered, the old pet name surfacing from the depths of his memory. "I'm here." "Good," she murmured, and fell asleep. He stayed there for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, his heart so full he thought it might burst. The past 5 years had been a cold, empty winter. But spring had finally come. The months that followed were a journey of discovery for them both. Leo was learning how to be a father. He learned to make pancakes, the first batch was a smoky disaster, to braid hair, a skill that required intense concentration and YouTube tutorials, and to navigate the complex social politics of the first-grade playground. He attended parent-teacher conferences, packed lunches, and kissed scraped knees. Each mundane task was a gift, a piece of the normal life that had been stolen from him. Lily, in turn, was learning to be a daughter. She was learning to trust, to let her guard down. The solemn, watchful child from the orphanage began to be replaced by a bubbly, curious, and sometimes mischievous little girl. Her laughter, once a rarity, began to fill the quiet rooms of their house. He found that memories of Sarah and their life together continued to return, not in overwhelming flashes, but in gentle waves. The scent of Lily's shampoo would remind him of the way Sarah's hair smelled after a shower. A certain slant of afternoon light would bring back the image of her reading in her favorite armchair. He didn't shy away from these memories. He welcomed them. He told Lily stories about her mother, about her kindness, her funny laugh, her love of bad jokes. He wanted Lily to know that she was the product of a great love. One Saturday, he took her back to Havenwood. He showed her Peggy's diner and introduced her as his daughter. Peggy enveloped her in a hug, tears in her eyes, and gave her a giant slice of apple pie on the house. He then drove them to the ruins of their old home. He had been hesitant, worried it would be too sad for her, but he felt it was important for her to see where she came from. They walked through the overgrown clearing, hand in hand. "This is where our house was," he said softly, "and this was my workshop. I used to make things out of wood here. I made you a cradle in this very spot." She looked at the charred remains, her expression thoughtful. "Mommy is a star," she said, not with sadness, but with a simple certainty. "But she lived here first, with us." "Yes, she did," Leo said, his voice thick. He had purchased the land back. He wasn't sure what he would do with it, but he knew he couldn't let it go. It was sacred ground. As they were about to leave, Lily bent down and picked a single, resilient wildflower that was growing up through a crack in the old foundation. She held it up to him. "For Mommy," she said. He took the flower, his heart aching with a beautiful, bittersweet pain. He had lost so much in that place, but in a way, it had also given him everything. It had forged the love that had survived memory, time, and the machinations of cruel men. It had created the song that had, against all odds, led him back home. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing of their new house, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, Lily rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Daddy," she said, her voice sleepy. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I love you too, Lilybug, more than all the stars in the sky." His journey had been a long and painful one, from a forgotten life to a false one, and finally to a true one. He was no longer the haunted ghost in a boardroom or the broken man in the ruins. He was just Leo, a father, a man who had been given a second chance to build a life, not with plans and tools, but with patience, forgiveness, and a love that had proven strong enough to remember. His story was a testament to the fact that a person is not defined by the money they have or the title they hold, but by the love they give and the home they build in the hearts of others. What song lies buried in your own heart, waiting to lead you home?